Good morning. We're going to speak with you about recording student homeless data and reporting, and I think we'll have maybe some time at the end for some questions. If not, feel free to submit those and we'll get answers back out to you. And as I said, our title is Homeless Children and Youth Data Collection Updates. You could reach out to myself, and if I can't answer it, I'll tap into Marjorie and I'll see, and we'll get you an answer to your questions. Topics that we'll cover today are on the screen. Audience and resources, the definition and identification of homeless students, the different features that you would see, and some updates. We'll cover those. And then Marjorie will cover some of the more intricate parts inside of Infinite Campus. So the audience, this is designed for district homeless coordinators and persons responsible for homeless data collection and reporting at the district and school level. And on this screen, you're going to see hyperlinks to different resources that are great to have on hand if you aren't able to reach one of us. We do typically get back with you within 24 hours for questions on homeless education, but you have a lot of the information is in the data standard, and we work hard to update that every year with any changes. There's also even more links on the Education for Homeless Children and Youth website. The data is listed on its own website, and we post aggregate data for schools for 3 prior years. And then the NCHE, that's the National Center for Homeless Education, they provide technical assistance from the U.S. Department of Education. So you can rest assured that anything you get from them is top tier information. That's who we reach out to if we need technical assistance to answer a question. So any of the items that you would ever get from their website is high quality. We have a link for the pupil attendance manual, and it has a discussion for homeless students, and then the QA homeless quick reference card, which is handy to have for some of those repetitive questions. The definition and identification of homeless students begins with where the homeless students stay at night. And the definition includes children and youth that lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. The words fixed, regular, and adequate aren't defined in the federal law, so we use a dictionary definition for those terms. Some of the students may be sharing housing due to the loss of housing, economic hardship, similar reason, could be domestic violence. They could be living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, but that would be some trailers. Oh, can we go back a slide?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
My hand just did it. I apologize.
You're fine. Not all trailers, not all trailer parks count as homeless. We have what is called substandard living conditions, and actually in Kentucky, the students that are homeless currently are 8.8% of our McKinney-Vento, which is higher than the national average. But that also includes students who are living in a shelter, which is considered substandard. It could be missing a utility. It could be infested by vermin or insects. It could be missing windows. It could be missing part of the roof, those sorts of things. That also includes students that would be living in their car or outside in the elements. Students who are living on campgrounds, and this is all due to a lack of an alternative accommodation. This past year, I had a question where someone called and said, if a family's living on a houseboat, are they homeless? Well, I can't say that all houseboats would be non-homeless, but this houseboat met all of the needs of the family, and they were living there out of a choice. So that would not be homeless. Similarly, if a family is choosing to live in an RV lifestyle and the RV is meeting all of the needs and it's a very up-to-date new RV and they have connections to utilities and things, that would not be homeless either. Students who live in emergency or transitional shelters qualify. Students also who are abandoned in hospitals. Children and youth who have a primary nighttime residence that is a public place not designated as a regular sleeping accommodation include students living in cars, parks, public places, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, buses, train stations, similar settings. Migratory children who can qualify as homeless because of their primary nighttime residence. So when I'm walking through questions about this, I always go back to the person who's calling and ask, where are they staying at night and how did they end up there? What were the circumstances behind that? And I'm happy to walk through that. Usually it's a case by case basis because so there are so many things at play. So never worry about calling in if you have a unique situation. Homeless data entry, there's a path on the screen. You would go from student information to program participation to homeless, and you see an icon on the screen as well that would show you where you would click in Infinite Campus. And creating the homeless record, you're going to select from the nighttime residents from the drop-down list. Select, are they an unaccompanied youth? And an unaccompanied homeless youth is a special designation inside of homeless students in general. And that means they're just physically separated from their parents. Homeless students do not have to be emancipated from their parents. They sometimes leave home because they're kicked out, they run away, there's violence, drug abuse in the home. We could do an entire training just on unaccompanied homeless youth. And so you'll want to check yes or no there. Enter the start date. This should be the date the student was determined eligible for the homeless services. Note, the end date is currently not auto-populating and must be manually entered. This is a change. It used to auto-populate, but right now we're having to manually enter it as 6:30. One other thing I'd like to say here, at the beginning of the year, if we choose primary nighttime residents, and perhaps they're doubled up or they're unsheltered. If that changes throughout the year, leave it for the first identified setting. We've decided that is the cleanest way to do it. We're going to keep it with what they were identified through. Thanks, Marjorie. And I believe that's on this slide too. Select the primary nighttime residence of the student at the time the student was determined eligible. And here you see the 4 designations inside of Infinite Campus. We have shelters and transitional housing, doubled up, which means they're staying with another family or someone else out of an economic need. That can be tricky. There is no length of time. It could be years, it could be days, it could be a day. The federal law does not set a minimum or a maximum. Unsheltered includes inadequate substandard housing, living on the street, all the things that I said before. And then we have students who are living in hotels and motels. And as I said before, this could change throughout the year. However, the selection should remain as the student's status at the time of identification for the reporting year. This is just to be consistent across the state. Several of them may change throughout the year, and it would be very hard to keep track of everyone. Inadequate and substandard housing. I think this is some place where we have a room for improvement to make sure that we're identifying everyone, because there's a misconception in some places that if a family is inside of a dwelling, they would not qualify for homelessness. The primary nighttime resident designation, unsheltered, should be used for students living in substandard living conditions, according to the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Program non-regulatory guidance. So that's federal non-regulatory guidance. And here we have a list of all the things that you could do during a visit to see if it is an unsheltered designation under substandard living conditions. Are they missing utilities, water, electricity, heat? Does it have vermin or mold? Is it lacking a basic functional part? Does it present an unreasonable danger inside of the dwelling? Local education agencies could also refer to local or state housing codes, which could also aid in the identification of that. Unaccompanied homeless youth, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Two conditions must be present for a child or youth to be considered unaccompanied homeless youth in the McKinney-Vento Act. Number one, the child or youth's living arrangement must meet the definition of homeless. So if they aren't having that nighttime residence that meets the definition, they can't be an unaccompanied homeless youth. The next would be not being in the physical custody of their parents. They don't have to be legally separated from the parent. They can show up to a school and ask to be enrolled without parents' permission. There is no age range on how young an unaccompanied homeless youth can be, and there is no, our age maximum could run as high as 21 for students who have the right to be in school up to 21 in Kentucky. Homeless students subsequently identified as foster care. We keep this in here because previously some people had questions about this. If an identified homeless student subsequently becomes a foster student during the year, the student's foster care record will be created in Infinite Campus based on a weekly import file received from the Cabinet for Family and Human Health and Family Services. And there's more about that in the foster care data standards. This would result in Infinite Campus record in which a homeless student is also identified as a foster student. However, being placed in foster care doesn't make someone homeless. Typically, you can't be a foster student and a McKinney-Vento homeless student at the same time, unless you've started out as a homeless student and then became foster. There's much more in-depth discussion of this. I just want you to know that when you run the reports, you can see that some students do have both of those designations, but it would just be for that one school year while those extra Title I services stay in effect for that one school year while the student was identified. Kentucky Homeless Services. This section will allow schools to document, this is optional. So this is inside of Infinite Campus, and this section allows the schools to document student services provided due to being homeless, and the data will be transferred with a student as a reference to the receiving district. Documentation of enrollment, academics and enrichment services. It isn't KDE mandated, but it is recommended. And it is one way that you could work to reduce barriers for the students as they move around. Oh, Marjorie, I think I've started on your part.
Okay, I'll pick up here.
So sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Marjorie Conley. I'm covering more of the data side for our homeless youth. I'll start with this, the homeless youth children addendum to services. The path you'll see listed at the top of the slide there. It's a form designed to accompany services to students. The data will be transferred with the student as a reference for the receiving district. The collection is not KDE mandated. For subsequent enrollments, once a student is identified as homeless, the student's homeless record, including primary nighttime residence and unaccompanied youth status, should remain the same as the original designation once a student's record is created. This includes students placed in a facility or group home after the identification of homeless in the current academic year. The student records transfer. Homeless data transfers as a summary through the student record transfer process. This, the data will be in a PDF file, which means the receiving district will need to create a new homeless record in their district database for the student. The data elements on the PDF should be entered into the receiving district's database as shown on the transfer document. The start date should be updated to reflect the date in which the student enrolled in the receiving district, and the end date, as Zach discussed earlier, is not auto-populating, but you'll want to populate the date as 6/30 of the reporting year. The student summary report is available by going to student information, program participation, and homeless. This report generates a list of homeless records for a specific student. We also have some state published ad hoc filters. These reports are available to assist with identification of homeless students transferring from another district or who were homeless in a previous year and may need to be evaluated for homelessness in the current year. As with all of our reports in Infinite Campus, the appropriate staff will need to be granted access through the district to have access to the report. Another report to assist with data validation is the QA Homeless Report. The purpose of this report is to provide a list of homeless students to be used for state and federal reporting purposes. The detailed report also provides the user with highlighted elements to indicate data quality issues. The report should be generated on a regular basis throughout the school year to identify homeless students enrolled in the district and identify data quality issues that need to be addressed. This is a really great report because it does highlight, and I believe we have an example, but it will highlight anything that needs to be corrected so that the student will be counted as homeless in reporting. The QA Homeless Aggregate Report is going to generate in a PDF format, and it contains unduplicated counts of students identified as homeless anytime during the reported year. This report also calculates a percentage of homeless students by gender, race, ethnicity, and by grade, living status, unaccompanied youth status. This is a really good report if you need to share any homeless information because everything is aggregated. So there's not going to be any PII for the student's information. The QA Homeless School Report Card option is also listed on the same page with the QA Homeless Report. It's to assist with the verification of district and schools homeless student group counts during the school report card review process. The report will generate counts of homeless students who have a primary enrollment in schools, including the school report card reporting, and the table is going to provide a count of homeless students by race, gender, and other student groups. For data validation, please make sure to validate homeless records to ensure accuracy for the school report card and for other federal and state reporting. The district homeless liaison coordinator should ensure the correct students are reported, including withdrawn students. If a homeless indicator were reported from a prior year enrollment, the homeless liaison should review the homeless status in the current year and update the program participation indicators as needed. We recommend doing this at a minimum quarterly to ensure that we have the most accurate data. Once you run the QA reports, you can filter the QA detailed report on the free reduced lunch column to ensure that all homeless students are receiving free meals. The report highlights the field as an error if the status is marked reduced or paid. Please collaborate with your food service coordinators to ensure the student frame record in Infinite Campus is updated and the student is receiving free lunch for the remainder of the academic school year. Please make sure to validate homeless records to ensure that all students are enrolled in free lunch. And this is going to give you an example that if they are not on free lunch, if it's reduced lunch, then you will see a highlighted field, which lets you know that that needs to be updated. The reporting timeline for homeless data should be complete and accurate by June the 30th. This year we've got June the 28th because that's following prior to a weekend. We do June the 30th each year because KDE extracts homeless data on July 1st from the district data warehouse. And you will see Zach's information and my contact information as well. So if you've got any questions, we're happy to answer.
And we do have some questions for the two of you all. So it looks like somebody's been answering them, but while we've got some time, we'll go over and cover them. We'll kind of start with the top because some of these have been popped up. So the first question is, do we need to audit our homeless records before June 30th to make sure they all have the June 30th end date, since this is no longer auto-populating?
I would. We're going to need, everything should be June the 30th. So if it's not June the 30th, then that'll need to be updated to reflect June the 30th.
Yeah. Wendy was mentioning in her response that the entry is a required field. So the record shouldn't be able to be saved without June 30th. But I think I heard Wendy pop on, so she could say that.
Yeah, I just added, I answered that question, that the data entry is a required field. So the user will have to enter something. Of course, we hope based on guidance that they enter in 6/30 of 2024. But you can audit this by running the QA homeless report in Infinite Campus and looking at the homeless end date field. So you'd be able to capture any or catch any there that are not marked as 6/30/2024 as the end date.
Thank you. The next question is, when they leave their parents and become unaccompanied, do we remove the parents from IC? Because I had a student wanting the parents off his info because his mom was in drug rehab.
So that becomes really complex, and it's probably too hard to provide a general answer to everyone for that. It would probably depend on how old the student is. We'd have to look at FERPA and the individual circumstance in that case. And I would just encourage that liaison to reach out to me, and we would review it and then maybe have them speak with their board counsel.
Yeah.
I answered it, Zach, but I'm going to add to that to contact you. I had answered it as unaccompanied youth does not always mean the student is emancipated, and the student guardianship information should only be updated in IC if there is a court order to change guardianship. But I will add to that to contact you about the individual circumstance.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I don't know if when they're over 18 they can request that or not, and that's something that I'm happy to look into. I just haven't had that. I haven't had a reason to look into that yet, but I'm happy to.
Yeah, from a FERPA standpoint, I think once they hit 18, it's much easier for them to ask for that. Before that, the parents have all the rights to the education records under FERPA, unless it's something is court ordered. So I think you're right, Zach. It's individual based on circumstances.
I will also say most of the unaccompanied youth live with a trusted adult. I was an unaccompanied youth when I was a junior and a senior, and I was 18 at the time, so that's kind of why I don't know. But sometimes they'll want to put the trusted adult on their school records, and that doesn't happen because that would require court orders and things like that. And instead, what happens is the unaccompanied or the homeless liaison sort of becomes a caretaker in decision making and things like that, since there's not a parent guiding them in decisions. So there is guidance built into the law, but it can be very complex, and it's one of those things we could go on and on about.
So
I added the clarification.
Thank you. So we have a student misidentified as a foster child on the Infinite Campus record, and we can't edit it. We have had no luck getting this record corrected for the student. Again, the student was never a foster student.
So I answered that one. I told them this is a specific issue, so we probably need to look at the SSID of the student, and they can email that to me, Wendy Spalding, and Sharma Adkins. She's our foster care liaison. We were, as Zach stated in the presentation, we receive that data from the Cabinet for Health and Family Services on a weekly basis. So those fields in IC are populated and cannot be edited, but we could look at the student details and maybe provide some technical assistance by discussing it with the Cabinet and or the case manager to see maybe why that student, the district doesn't think that student should be marked as foster. So
Yeah, and
that's how
it
I
could
answered
be-
the question.
Yeah, it could be a mismatch on the data too, as it comes
Mhm.
in matched to the wrong student for some reason, or, and definitely there's some things that we can do to help fix that if it's a problem.
Yeah.
If a student turns 18 and could still live at home, but chooses to leave and doesn't have a fixed nighttime residence, should they be marked as homeless?
It depends on why they choose to leave. So there's a flow chart for unaccompanied homeless youth. One thing that we wouldn't do is we wouldn't ask a student to prove that to prove the abuse or something like that. The law really does have ask us to take the student's word for it and stuff like that. If they don't have a primary nighttime residence, however, they would be homeless. And McKinney-Vento services run up until graduation day. So I would probably have to see the specific scenario and go through everything before I gave an answer, but those are some general guidelines.
Right. Question is, if a foster student is living in a DCBS office and they could they also be listed as homeless?
No. So that is temporary housing within the foster care system, but that does not count as homeless. The only time where a foster student could possibly be homeless is if they ran away from their foster home to become an unaccompanied homeless youth, or if a foster parent's home burned down and they were maybe put up in a hotel while repairs were being made. And those cases are so very rare. So.
Okay. Last question here now. We got some more time. So if anybody has other questions, please go out to app.gosoapbox.com and KDE data to enter any questions. If a family moves in with another family, is only the family who has to move in classified as homeless, doubled up?
Yeah, so the host family does not qualify for McKinney-Vento services. It would be the family without their own nighttime residence. And that sort of leads me to another thing, if we've got just a second. Sometimes we'll have divorced parents where one is qualified as McKinney-Vento and the other one is not. The student would still be marked as McKinney-Vento, but any wraparound services would only be provided when the student is staying with the parent who is homeless.
Thank you. That is all the questions we have right now. We have a few more minutes, or a couple more minutes now. If you want to bring anything else up, I didn't say this at the beginning, but we do make a point of starting on the start times for each session so that people can come and go on specific sessions versus trying to figure out when we're going to start. So our next session does start in a couple minutes.
I'm good. Marjorie, do you all have anything else?
I'm good.
Thank you all for your time and for everybody who watched.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you both. And thanks, Wendy, for jumping on too. Appreciate it.